Addison didn't know why she let Naomi talk her into this. She really wasn't in the mood for it. They'd just gone to the movie last night. Wasn't one night out enough? But when Naomi set her mind on something, she usually got her way. When Addison's social life was the focus, Naomi typically begged to the point where Addison was too tired to argue with her. Tonight was one of those nights. Naomi had her mind set on getting Addison out of the apartment, and not for something work or school related. Addison had to admit she went a little stir-crazy from time to time, but she never felt justified using it as an excuse to be out around people. She definitely wasn't comfortable with it now, but tonight Naomi hadn't given her a choice. "Aren't you tired of this by now?" Addison asked as she scanned the room in front of them. "Working at a bar isn't enough, you have to go drinking in your downtime too?" "Bar hopping never gets old," Naomi replied in a chipper voice, obviously pleased with herself. "Besides, what else is there to do in town? I'm not in the mood for another movie, and you refuse to go to the city. Therefore, we settle on the only other thing to do in Quiet Brook. Drink. So be festive, or I'll be forced to beat it out of you." "I was festive last night. I don't have enough in me for tonight, too." Naomi rolled her eyes. "We went to a movie. That hardly qualifies." "You're the one who insists on taking me out in public. You'll just have to deal with what I feel like giving." "In that case, I think you need to channel a Santa-esque persona, and give all the more." Addison couldn't help but smirk. "Yeah, I'll work on that." They had just entered the bar, and already eyes were on them. It wasn't difficult to see the intent behind each set watching them, sizing them up. There were looks of curiosity, of admiration, and surprise. There were also gazes of lust and glares of jealousy. Addison and Naomi were used to the stares by now. They seemed to follow the women wherever they went. Tension filled the air as they walked up to the bar and sat down. They didn't have to wait for the bartender to notice their presence. He'd been one of the people checking them over. He was more curious than anything, it seemed. Addison and Naomi had never been to this bar before, so he was probably wondering what two women like them were doing in a small-town bar. "Evening, ladies. What can I get for you?" "I'll have a shot of tequila and a whiskey sour," Naomi fired off. The bartender nodded and turned to Addison. She stifled a groan and shot a quick glare at Naomi. Being around people was one reason she didn't want to go out. Another was that she couldn't stand alcohol. Just like it affected others, Naomi and Addison could become intoxicated, which wasn't smart on their part. They could make stupid mistakes, too. Beyond that, she couldn't stand the taste. But her true drink of choice wouldn't be on the bar's menu. For a fleeting instant, she imagined the look on the bartender's face if she were to ask for what she really craved. She felt her long-buried sixth sense of humor float to the surface, but shoved it back down. She mentally slapped herself for the thought. "Vodka 7, she mumbled. It wasn't the weakest drink, but at least she could tolerate it. It only burned a little. She glanced around at their audience uncomfortably while Naomi was amused, and eventually the eyes fell away. Occasionally, different people around the bar would examine the women more closely, but it was usually short-lived. One or two men would make prolonged assessments of them at regular intervals. Addison and Naomi didn't want to encourage their admirers, so they ignored the suggestive looks altogether. They sat there for an hour or more, discussing random topics as usual. Addison had barely touched her drink by the time Naomi finished her second. Addison had to give her props. Naomi disliked the taste of alcohol just as much as she did. It was all the practice she'd had working at a bar that allowed her to tolerate the stuff like she did. "Bars are one of the few places you can readily observe true human behavior," Naomi commented over her drink in a low, casual tone as she eyed the other patrons. "How's that?" Addison asked, vaguely curious. "The liquor. Humans lose their inhibitions under the influence, so you get a better view of their true personalities." "I don't know about that. Drinking can cause an otherwise polite person to become quite belligerent." "That's the inner self showing through. You get to see people at their worst. If you can handle that, the rest is nothing." Addison chuckled lightly and shook her head. She could understand where Naomi was coming from, but she couldn't completely agree with her. She had witnessed cruelty that was purely instinctive. Alcohol was hardly the worst catalyst. "If you say so." "I'm serious," Naomi said defensively, not allowing Addison to admit defeat so easily. Addison decided to humor her. "So how's somebody at their worst when they're drunk?" "Because they'll say practically anything and not give a damn what anyone else thinks." Addison sniffed. "Most people don't need to be drunk to do that." Naomi was about to retort when movement by the entrance caught her attention. She cocked an eyebrow and let out a sly smile. "Huh." Imagine that. She nodded toward the door. The sudden topic changed through Addison, and she turned to look for herself. She almost did a double take. Grayson? The door finished closing as Addison's co-worker paused a few feet from her, his eyes surveying the room. Without meeting Addison's surprised gape, he moved past her and Naomi to an empty seat at the far end of the bar. Just like when Addison and Naomi had walked in, eyes followed Grayson the entire way. The only difference now was the majority of the eyes focused on him were women's. Addison couldn't blame them. She and Naomi were watching him as well. While most of the women in the bar stared after Grayson with lustful intent, Addison was more dumbfounded than anything. She hadn't expected him to be the bar-going type. But then again, she'd only worked with them a few times, and they hadn't really talked. She knew nothing about him. Though she purposely hadn't shown any interest in the opposite sex for many years now, she couldn't deny Grayson's appeal. She was more inclined to notice it now, seeing him dressed in something other than work attire. Wearing jeans and a thin dark sweater that clung to his frame distractingly, he exuded a kind of subtle command, just in the way he moved. He brushed his light ash-blonde hair back, though it wasn't quite long enough to get in his eyes. As he sat at the bar now, he gave off the aura of the mysterious, quiet type, the kind of man most women took immediate notice of. He didn't seem interested in gaining any attention at the moment, though. He glanced around the bar in an uninterested fashion, not once making eye contact with either Addison or Naomi. Whoa. Naomi was clearly impressed. You seriously work with him? Naomi had met Grayson briefly one morning before dawn when she picked Addison up from the grocery store after her shift. She'd commented then that she thought he was attractive, but like Addison, she seemed to notice him more now that he wasn't in his work clothes. Who knew an overcoat and a hat could detract from a person's appearance so much? Rather than reply, Addison took the first real drink from her glass. The vodka warmed her chest on the way down. Does he always look that good? Naomi asked. Addison shrugged. Couldn't say. I don't pay much attention. Yeah, right, Naomi scoffed. She ordered another drink from the bartender, keeping her eyes on Grayson the entire time. Maybe I should get into baking. Addison avoided looking in Grayson's direction. You'd be bored. Not if I got to work with him, Naomi replied, jutting her chin toward Grayson. Would you mind picking your tongue up off the bar and quit ogling the guy? I'm sure he doesn't like being looked at like a piece of meat. Naomi smirked at both the analogy and Addison's annoyance. He probably gets it wherever he goes. Besides, I'm not the only one staring. Addison unintentionally glanced around at the women seated at the bar. Virtually all of them were peeking at him every now and then. When she risked a quick glimpse in his direction, she saw he was focused on something in his hands on top of the bar. It took her a fraction of an instant to recognize he was holding a cell phone. From what she could tell, he was texting. She returned her eyes to the drink in front of her, running her fingers up and down the side of the glass as she played with the condensation accruing there. Hey there, gorgeous. Addison looked up automatically as a bright voice sounded next to her. For a split second, she expected to see Grayson standing there. To her dismay, one of the overzealous admirers she and Naomi had gained since their arrival was staring down at her with a cocky grin across his face. Great. Hi, she responded mechanically. I'm Jason. What's your name? Rita, she replied without hesitating. He mumbled, eyeing her doubtfully. You don't look like a Rita. Addison shrugged. What can I say? She said before looking him in the eye. Looks can be deceiving. From the corner of her eye, she saw Naomi shake her head and chuckle into her drink. Well, Rita, can I buy you a drink? This was another reason she avoided going out. Addison hid the grimace she felt and stifled the groan in her throat. She saw a smug smirk cross Naomi's face over the guy's shoulder. She tried to think of the best way to be diplomatic. Thanks, but we're actually leaving in a minute. He smiled knowingly as he tried to hide the sting of rejection. Well, that's too bad. Are you sure you can't stay for one more? I promise I'll be a perfect gentleman. Sorry, Addison said as she eyed Naomi, suggesting she finish her drink as soon as possible. I have to work in the morning. Yeah? What do you do? He prodded. Addison gritted her teeth in aggravation. This guy just wouldn't give up. She caught a mocking look from Naomi and decided to be a little more ruthless. She gave the guy a fake smile. I'm a research assistant for a lab. What kind of lab? His interest piqued. I'm helping to find a cure for some very contagious STDs. The guy's smile faded immediately and his skin paled. Naomi couldn't hold back her laugh this time, and she coughed in an attempt to cover it. "Oh," he said quietly after a few awkward moments and backed away a couple steps. "Well, it was nice meeting you," he mumbled before bolting back to his seat. Naomi chuckled as she watched the guy escape. "Nice. I'll have to remember that one." Addison rolled her eyes and groaned in irritation. Why can't men ever take no for an answer? "Because they think persistence will pay off," Naomi shrugged before adding. "Plus, we're hot." "Yeah, well, they're persisting in the wrong direction." Naomi threw down the rest of her drink, making a face as the liquor hit her chest. She cocked her head at Addison. "In that case, let's go. You don't want to miss working with your STDs by oversleeping tomorrow morning," she snickered. Addison's expression twisted in faux horror. "Now that would be tragic." As they got up and made their way to the door, Addison casually glanced over her shoulder. When her eyes fell upon the seat Grayson had been sitting in, she saw it was empty. Confused, she frowned and glanced around the bar to see where he'd moved to, but he was nowhere to be seen. Still frowning, she turned back to the door and went outside to where Naomi waited for her.